Welcome to Bad Dog Agility, a podcast helping you reach all of your dog agility goals. Whether it's competing under the bright lights of the televised finals at Westminster or successfully navigating a homemade course in your own backyard, we'll bring you training tips, interviews, and news about the great sport of dog agility. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
I'm ready.
I'm ready.
The show starts with your hosts, Jennifer, Esteban, and Sarah.
I'm Jennifer.
I'm Esteban.
And I'm Sarah, and this is episode 304. Today's podcast is brought to you by hititboard.com and the new Teeter Teach It, an easy-to-use tool that controls the amount of tip on your teeter so you can introduce motion to your dog in a gradual way. Go to hititboard.com for the new Teeter Teach It and other training tools and toys. Use discount code BDA10 to get 10% off your order. That's hititboard.com. Today, we are joined by Greg Derrett, longtime competitor, household name in the agility community. And he and his wife, Laura, created the organization UKI, which now has become very popular here in the United States. I think in terms of entries, is getting more entries than USDAA, a step behind AKC, but definitely on the rise. And we just had the US Open in the fall, and some announcements were made for the upcoming year, and people had questions about some of the changes. So we wanted to have him on this podcast today to go through what's new, but also give those of you who are not familiar with UKI a little view into the organization and the events that it supports. So welcome to the podcast, Greg.
Hi, how you guys doing today?
We're doing good. Yeah.
It's quite the introduction.
I know, all in one breath, right?
Household name, I like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely, at least in our household, let's put it that way. So we wanted to start off first to kind of bring people up to speed who aren't as familiar with UKI. So give us just a short history of UKI, like when you started it, why you started it, and kind of what makes UKI special.
Okay, well, I guess we originally started in the United Kingdom with UK Agility, and that was in 2004. And that was basically, Kennel Club has been the only organisation in Great Britain since the start of all dog sport. And we just felt there was a market for an alternative and a need for an alternative, basically to keep the Kennel Club on their toes a little bit. But also to offer a different way to compete. Kennel Club back then was very much a win system. So unless, you had to beat 400 dogs to progress out of beginners, for example. So it was a very, very competitive and it was good in one respect for the sport, but not so good for other dogs. So we came in with sort of UK ethos of agility for all dogs, wanting high level competition, but also to create different heights and different progression. So we were running 6 or 7 years, and at that time I was doing a lot of seminars in North America. And every time I came over, it was, can you bring it here? Can you bring it here? Was constantly asked. So in 2010, we sort of made the decision to, okay, we'll try it in North America and move it across the States. And really the ethos behind it was, at heart, I'm a dog trainer and a competitor, and I've got an idea of how agility should be run without all the politics of kennel clubs and organisations, and that's kind of how we run the organisation with that at the forefront of our decision making, is that it should be about dog agility and the sport and nothing else, and trying to make it the best it can be for competitors more than anyone else that's involved on the outside of the sport. So that's kind of the history. We've grown fairly rapidly. We're approximately about 14,000 members in North America. We've just got into Mexico. We've got a few shows in Singapore and Australia. So it's kind of, it's gradually creeping around. But with UKI, the main focus is the US and Canada, really. And that's where we're largest.
Yeah, I think it shows our age in the sport that we think of UKI as a new thing. Because when you said 2012, did you say, or 2010? Well, 2010 here. I mean, that's like, we're past the decade mark and everything. Yeah. And I thought, wow, I guess it really isn't all that new anymore. But I think that if people go and read the rule book, it becomes apparent how much it really is built around the competitor. Like, I know that that's what you say, and I know that's what's on your website, but I am constantly impressed by how every decision that is made really comes at it from what is the best for the competitor. So I think it is a really a cool thing that you've done to be able to come in as a competitor and build an entire organization that is now as popular as it is.
It's good to hear that you guys think that. So yeah, but that really is. It's always, whenever we have a rule discussion, it's like, what would we want as a competitor? What do I think needs to improve as a competitor? It's where we're from, and it's really, we don't know any other way, I guess, is probably the best way to look at it. Is that really is our thought, from my thought from a 12-year-old kid competing all the way through to a few years later. It's been that, what would I like to do, and what should it be? What should a competition look like?
In my experience, not just to account what you would want as an exhibitor, but I feel like you listen to your competitors a lot as well. As a person who does UKI and a competitor of UKI, I think you guys take the feedback that you hear and you really, really work hard to accommodate the competitors and the exhibitors a lot.
Yeah, I think it's important that you can go into sort of, customer relations and everything like that, but actually the person that knows agility best is the competitor, and the guys on the ground are telling you what's wrong. There's obviously, everybody wants rule changes for their dogs and their current situation that you have to be very mindful of, that not all rule ideas are great, because they are very specific to, my dog would do better if you did this, and you have to look after the sport. But on the whole, when you hear lots of people telling you if there's a problem, it's normally true, and it's normally needs addressing. So that's really, if one person's asked for a rule change, well, but if 50 people from all over the country are asking for a rule change or improvements or what we could do, then let's listen to them, because they probably know more than we do.
That's awesome. So let's start with what is new for 2022. One of the things that really got people buzzing was that you announced an inaugural West Coast US Open. So the US Open is an event that happens every year. It just happened this fall. It doubles as like a national event and as a tryout event for the WAO. So tell us a little bit about this new event that's being added. Like, why are we having a second Open?
Okay, so it's a separate event. So the US Open will still be the US Open, and that will be the main national event and main way to get on WO team. The reason for the West Coast Open is demand in the West Coast is growing. A constant call for us to take the US Open across to the West Coast. However, we are, being blunt, we were much, much bigger on the East Coast. And when we bring a team of 20 guys over from the UK to run the event, we need a certain amount of people turning up to help us, basically pay that bill. I'm blunt on that one. So we're looking to sort of see what the demand is on the West Coast. People love these type of events. It seems to be that it's where agility's gone the last 10 years. They want tournament styles, cup style events, not just in North America, but if you look throughout Europe now, there's all sorts of different opens, without naming them, that throughout most countries now have their own open event: Polish Open, Hungarian Open, Moravia Open, Czech Open, and it's where everybody is going and what they're wanting, and they want that kind of high level event, and certainly at the highest level of the sport, maybe not the lower level, but the higher level. So obviously, the US is a big country, and traveling from one coast to the other to compete is quite a commitment. So the idea is to have a very similar format of event, and long term, if it takes off on the West Coast, then we could be looking at 1 year the US Open will be on the West, and there will be an East Coast Open, and then the following year it will flip back, so there'll be the West Coast Open and the US Open will be on the East. So that's kind of a thought we could be going towards. It really does depend on the uptake and the popularity of it in California or on that side of the states, of whether we do that. But that's certainly something that's in our planning if it works, really. And it's it's trying it this year. We've made the event slightly different. There's some events that are similar, like the biathlon and the games, but we put a pentathlon there instead of the obviously US Open. We only want one US Open event, so the UKI National, sorry. So that will stay at the US Open. So instead of having a Nationals, we put on a pentathlon, which is a W event, which we've not done before at that type of event. So similarities, but a few changes and a few differences to keep it a bit unique.
Excellent. Okay, that totally for me clarifies, and it was not at all the way I was thinking of the event. So I think that'll be very helpful for everybody listening. So it really is like a standalone event that's similar to the US Open, but the US Open is still the US Open. That's the Nationals, and that's the tryouts and all of that. Yeah,
I mean, it's there to give people that don't want to travel 3,000 miles across the States an event that's similar, to give them experience. I think as you try and develop the sport as well, people need access to these big events. In my opinion, I'm also, one of my other jobs is GBT manager for the FCI, AWC and EO. And one of my big pushes to people is that where you get good agility is by competing at big events under pressure. And if you hide from them, you won't develop those skills, and you can be brilliant at that local show, but you've got to step up and learn how to compete when you've got the scary people like Jen Crank standing next to you, kind of thing, you know? So I think it's good for the lower level people that aren't going to travel across state, but they can also go and experience an event like this and decide, yeah, this is for me. I do want to get better. This is something I will travel for. And they learn how to do that and how to compete at that type of event. So that's also in our thinking a little bit to help. I'm probably wrong to say this, but politically wrong, but people say that the East Coast is currently a lot higher standard than the West Coast. Now, I personally don't know that, but that's the feedback we are getting from competitors, and maybe that's because we've had the US Open on the East Coast for the last 8 years, and it's, you know, we did run the US Open on the West Coast for a couple of years back in 2010, 2011, I think 2012. But since then, we've been on the East Coast, and maybe the development on the East Coast has been because they've got this type of event and this style of agility to aim for and compete at, whereas maybe the other nationals don't push the level as hard as the US Open has. Dare I say that, without causing too much flack.
No, I agree 100% that you're going to get better at just being a competitor and dealing with your mental game the more of these bigger events that you go to. And for so long, it was always, you could go to your local show, and then you could once a year go to a national event. Yeah. So, and that's in a lot of organizations, but like I was super excited when you guys added classics and cups. And that was something that UKI added maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And that was kind of like took it to the next level. And then we all flocked to those and love those. And then now this West Coast Open kind of giving us one more level up. So the more of these opportunities that come to the competitors, the better we're going to get as a whole. And I think that's going to do nothing but be a positive for our sport.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the Cups and Classics were, again, to give people an exposure to a slightly higher level than the local show, and a bit of pressure of gaining buys and just more people coming into that area, which I guess from my knowledge of USDA, that's what the regionals kind of did. So it was kind of a look at that, but also though trying to create that tournament style that you're going to see at, you know, not just in UKI, but also when you get to WO, and also you really look at EO and AWC, FCI, they're tournament styles really. It's 1 or 2 runs, but you've still got to progress through. At the EO, you've got to get through that individual team, and AWC, you've got to put your 2 runs together over a couple of days. So all of that stuff is aiming for those type of events, you know, and the more we can encourage people to improve, the better the sport gets, in my opinion, and it makes our job easier when the standard's higher as well. So,
well, the two of you just made my job easier, because this is the perfect segue to asking about the Cups and the Classics and buys, which you have mentioned. So what are the differences between the Cup and the Classic? Like, what is it, just a name?
I guess the Cup's slightly higher level on the competitor, and also it really depends what your goals are for the event. But the Cups will give you a buy into the nationals, whereas the Classics give you a buy into the speed stakes, and there's a couple of other things that they move you into, but the cup's just a slightly higher tournament level. I would suggest on the two. When we started with cups, and they were just so popular, and basically trial managers just screaming that they wanted them, and we don't want to water the cups down so that there's 500 cups a year. We want them to stay 5 or 6 a year. And so the classics was sort of an alternative that we could appease some trial managers that wanted cups that weren't going to get them, and also just give another format of competing. So classes again are similar, but there's a few variations depending on which one it is. And I think now I think it's 7 or 8 in the US and 5 and 6 in Canada of each type. So yeah.
Okay.
And then the buys for the US Open, I mean, it was one of the things to actually clarify that the US Open, anybody can enter. You don't have to ever do UKI to enter everything at the US Open. And that's one of the misconceptions at times, is that people think they need buys, and you don't. The buys help you progress further. So if you turn up and have a disastrous day one at the US Open, a buy will save you. Basically, it's a get out of jail card almost. But you don't need to ever get a buy to attend the Open. And the word open that's really what we wanted the US Open to be. It's open to everybody. Everyone could turn up and enter every single event. And the buys just give you a bit of safety, basically.
Right. So Jennifer, sorry, go ahead.
No, go
on. So Jennifer, I wanted to ask you from your perspective as a competitor, how important are those buys? How hard are you going to work to get them before the Open versus, as Greg said, just showing up to the Open? And what's a good buy strategy for people who are thinking about, coming to, they know they definitely are going to go to the Open, right? That's their big event for the year. They're going to go, maybe this is their first year. How do you approach getting those buys?
I think the answer can be a little bit different for everyone with regard to their goals. So for me, last year, I did not do any local UKI. We do not have very many in our area, and they always fell on weekends that I had stuff going on. But I did decide to go to a cup. And the reason I made the effort to go to the cup is because I wanted to buy. And what I like about the cups, for my busy schedule, is they're only 2 days. So it's just a Saturday, Sunday. The one that I attended was only Saturday, Sunday, versus I feel like more and more events are getting drawn out, a warm up on Thursday and then a 3-day event. So I went to the cup and I really focused on it more for the 2 that I was going to be trying out for WAO, because of the way that the selection process worked for WAO. You want to get further in the progressions. So the buy at the cup into the nationals round 2 finals is a big part of the scoring system for our WAO team selection. So dogs that don't make it into the national final are deducted a lot of points from our WAO tryout process. So one of the dogs that I tried out with, I got the buy at the cup. The other dog I did not. And it turns out that I was able to go to the US Open and win on the all-around spot anyway. So in the end, I went with no buys, no local shows with B, and still was able to get the all around win on spot. But it's much nicer, especially if there is a run once you get to the Open that doesn't go well. Like Greg said, kind of get out of jail, or there's a run that, for whatever, maybe you injured a muscle and you need to skip a run. If you already have the buy, you can bypass that round, or maybe do a little bit of training. If you already have the buy, use the preliminary run to do a little bit of training on your contacts. A lot of it's just your mental game to go in there and say, okay, I'm going to do a nice job, but I know I already have the buy. So for me, the buys are huge. They were big. Not enough that I went to a classic because the buy there isn't as significant, but I've gone with dogs that didn't have buys and it's still a great event. You just have to work your skills a little more and a little bit better with your mental game. But what I like about the US Open, and we've talked about it on past podcasts, is there's different events. It's not all on one class. So if you have a bad run in one of the classes, you might not progress in that particular tournament, but then there's a different class, a different event that you maybe can do well in. So I encourage people to try to get buys, but they're buys because they're hard to get, and you're going to go to these cups and these classics and you're going to be up against some really good competition. So I would encourage people to go for them, but don't be discouraged if they don't get a buy. The US Open is still a great event to go to, even if you're walking in with no buys at all.
Yeah, I remember way back when from our USDA days that I felt like buys could be really helpful for teams that were like fast, but had an Achilles heel. So like bars or contacts, right? So like if you've got a dog that can win, but sometimes, faults out for those reasons, you can go to several events, have your good run that happens at the right time, you get your buy. And then if you, miss that contact on the day of the event, you've got the buy to get you out of agility jail.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing to mention is buys can also just be achieved at the local shows as well. You get enough clear rounds in those. You don't need to go to Cups and Classics to get. There's certain types of buys that are only available at Cups and Classics, but there are the normal buy. Big thing to always encourage people to do is go to the webpage and look. We've got a tracker on there that explains it in nice black and white. And I don't know how many messages we get a year where people ask about buys, and we just say, open the tracker and you'll be able to see everything you need to do. So anyone looking for that information on what buys, which way they take you, if you just go to the webpage, click on US Open, the first thing you'll see is a tracker. Open that document and it's nice and black and white for you on what the different ways to get to the different events.
Yeah, and we will put a link directly to that on the show notes page for anybody who is looking. I actually had in my outline for the podcast talking about the teams and the team selection and the WAO. But, I think that it's actually a little too complicated to just like off the cuff talk about. And it's probably better for people to go to that tracker, to use that for the buys, or talk to somebody in your local area who does a lot of UKI that can help do it. But we were talking a little bit before this podcast about how, reading the full premium, reading the description of the events that you're planning on doing in any organization. I encourage people to read through, because sometimes there are just little subtleties that can make a difference in how you approach and how the scoring is done. And people really need to take that time to fully understand the rules of what it is that they're entering.
Yeah, I think with rules, again, another thing that we've tried to do with UKI, WO, or UKA is they're written for the competitor. So they're not that scary rule book that's just deep and so many different clauses and stuff. It tries to be a bit more black and white and hopefully written for the agility person to understand a bit. It's not sort of a law book. It's about this is how the event works and these are the rules. So hopefully things like the tracker are actually very simple to understand if you just sit and just read them. That they're not the complicated things that you see with some of the kennel club rule books, for example, that get into great deep depth and stuff on sort of almost a lawyer's speak rather than just black and white agility. So we have tried to write them to help as well. Basically, I don't have the skills to write lawyer stuff. So.
All right, I'm going to jump in here as the newbie and admit that I've never ran at a UKI trial. Like I've never run a course. Maybe we did a practice course, but I've never done it. And I think in my most recent 10 years, it's been almost exclusively AKC, the American Kennel Club, because of our limited time. And so we just focus on the one venue here. And I think there are probably a lot of people who are like me, and they're hearing now about UKI. And there's a whole generation of people coming out of COVID, I think. New dogs, new puppies. Their dogs are 2 or 3 now, like our young dogs are 2 and 3. And now they are interested, but kind of the only world they know and the courses they know are AKC. So when we talk about course design and options, how are they different from what you might see at your typical AKC local trial? And I want to start here with Greg. First, are you kind of familiar with like the kind of courses we're putting up at national events and local trials and things like that? It's very different.
Yeah, my knowledge of AKC is limited, if I'm honest. We hear a lot of negative stuff about AKC courses from where we sit. And I don't have time to look at AKC courses because it's just but my opinion or what we're told on those is they're very controlled. Judges are they have to sort of tick certain boxes. What we try and do with UKI, and it's more of the European feel, is that the judges as designer, they're there to design. They're the expert on the design, and there's guidelines, and there are obviously rules to, like straight approach to contact is in today's sport is a must. So that's a hard and fast rule, although it's not in a lot of organizations, incredibly still at this stage. But we try and have a lot more flexibility, allow the judges to design with flow, space and distances more. We have changed our course approval in the last 6 months, or even less, to be honest. Laura has traditionally done every course and approved every course throughout UKI, which was getting to a point where her life was literally 70, 80 hours a week on approving courses. So we had to make some changes, and we brought in some 5 or 6 guys who are well respected in America, North America's competitors, and judges, obviously, and course designers. And we've looked at people that we think understand the type of course designs that we want in UKI, which is about the speed, the flow, the safety aspect of course design, and also the challenges to be level appropriate, which is really important. If you look at some courses, they are designed to be very, very high level, and we do want that for the high level people, but we also want the beginner dog to be treated correctly. So they've got courses that develop them as a beginner. And that's quite a skill for a judge, and if you're having to set up certain things and certain traps, I think you can lose that design aspect of what's good for a young dog and what flows and what creates that gradual increase of skill in the competition ring, which is vital for our dogs to learn what, the classic phrase of how great their dog is at home, but it can't do it in a competition ring. Well, that's probably because the competition ring hasn't allowed the handler to develop the dog properly, because they've not been progression through the levels like they should be. So one of our big things is to make sure judges understand that, you're designing for a beginner dog, and it needs to be appropriate. And as you go up those levels, you should be able to justify why it's now a harder level. So, but there's a lot more freedom, I guess, in our course design compared to perhaps AKC, which is I'm not an expert on that, but that's what I get told. And we've really taken the European ethos to where, until UKA in Great Britain and still in Europe, there is no course approval. A judge can turn up and build what they want. Nobody ever looks at it. So when you see some of these European courses, they will only have been seen by that judge. Some of the big events like AWC and EO, there is a little bit of approval, but still very much on the judge to design what they want to design. So, and if you're looking at some of the European designs at the moment with big distances that are beginning to come in, you can see that no one's approving them because they're all illegal. Because FCI's maximum being a 7-meter dog path currently, which is slightly changing in 23, but it currently is a 7-meter distance you're allowed, straight line distance you're allowed, that's it. And you're seeing some of these guys designing 9-10 meters. Well, that shows you no one's approving them. There's a lot of freedom, which is good, and that can be bad as well, obviously, with no approval. So but yeah, I think that's an outline of our course design sort of ethos: safety but level appropriate, and also challenging. As a competitor, I always wanted to be challenged. If you walk away thinking, that was 5 easy runs today, I didn't get, I got my 5 clear rounds without breaking sweat. That is nice in one respect, but at the end of the day, it's not going to improve the sport and it's not going to improve me. So that's also something that we want, is level appropriate, challenging people at the right level, but with safety also at the forefront. Obviously now, even more so now, safety is a huge topic in course design, and a very difficult topic. The biggest problem we have as an organisation is that when people don't like something, they throw out the safety word to try and get a rule change, and that's makes it difficult, because the minute someone says, "Oh, that's dangerous," you have to consider whether it is or not, and then and that's always going to be an opinion. It's never going to be a black and white answer on safety, because at the end of the day, our dogs are hitting 30 miles an hour at times. And going at a lot of speed with bits of wood, metal and plastic in front of them, it's never going to be 100% safe. So there has to be some understanding of that as well. But that's the most difficult course design issue at the moment, I think, personally, is safety and getting the balance right.
Yeah, you've covered a lot of different topics there, and you segued perfectly into some of the things that I wanted to talk about. So let me just take a moment to back up. First, I think on safety, I think all three of us are in agreement as far as safety. I think, just overall dog agility is a sport that comes with inherent risk. It's no different than someone playing soccer, or you would call it football. Football, right? Or basketball or anything like that. Rugby, certainly. But when I come back and I think about AKC and I think about my own experiences over the last 10 years, the two things that really jumped out to me, and part of it was working with a dog who would knock bars in certain situations, but not all situations. One is that there is very often what I would consider tight spacing for dogs as small as jumping in the 16-inch class, where their front feet would only hit the ground twice before they would have to get up and take off, right? Mm-hmm. And you throw in a turn there and suddenly you're dropping bars, right? Whereas if they can get their feet down 3 times or 4 times, they can make the proper adjustments, right? And bar knocking diminishes somewhat, if not a lot. So spacing, flow, certainly. And when people hear this, especially people who run bigger dogs or people who have dogs that drop bars occasionally, UKI starts to sound really good. Greg, you come on here, you start talking about this, and then they're like, okay, I'm going to do that. But there's a caveat here. They're looking over at FCI courses. And when they think about non-American courses in their head, they're thinking those huge courses with the young handlers who are running around with the border collies that are highly trained. And they might conflate the two, UKI and FCI, and say, UKI isn't for me. That would be their concern there. And it's interesting because you are the manager now, right, for Great Britain for these big FCI events.
Yeah.
Is it going to be enough for your people? So I guess these are two related questions. Is it enough for your team members to just train on UKI type courses and succeed in FCI? And what is the distinction between UKI and FCI such that the average American competitor can say, okay, let me try UKI out?
I think you have to also realize what you're looking at sometimes on Facebook. So what you see as the typical FCI course tends to be probably a massive high level event, mm-hmm. and isn't an FCI trial. It's, AWC or EO or one of these opens that we spoke about earlier, Dania Cup, Moravia, those kind of things. They design those events for the highest level competitors. They're not designed for the, it's not a normal trial. If you go to a normal FCI trial, you won't see those challenges. You won't see those. You'll see a more reasonable course, I guess you want to say that. and I think that's where people have to remember that you get an impression, and we get an impression here in England. We look at the European courses and like, oh my God, they're so technical. But we only ever look at the high level events. If you look at all the high level events here, and I only looked at them in America, if you only ever looked at, say, cups and classic courses, they're going to be very different to the local trial courses, and the course that's designed for the beginner. And then, and that's something that it's difficult to get a point across. But when you go enter an event, when you're judging an event, you need to be designing for that event, or as a competitor, you need to be going there prepared for that event. And if you don't want to do high level FCI courses, don't enter the AWC, because that's what you're going to get. But you can enter the FCI local trial if you live in France or Germany, and you're going to get a course that's suited to your dog. So I think that there needs to be that balance of people's understanding of what they're watching at times on courses, because if I watch football, I watch Champions League football, and I watch the guys playing Liverpool Milan tomorrow night, for example. So we're going to watch some of the best players in the world playing tomorrow night on TV. If I go down the local football pitch, I'm not going to play guys that level. I'm going to be playing some fat old 45-year-old men like myself that are going to be, falling over, very little skill and very little fitness. So it's still the same sport, but it's a different level that I'm competing at. And therefore, all that needs to be taken into consideration. So yes, UKI at the highest level, for the US Open, if we brought in a European judge, which we do, we would expect him to be designing, the difficult courses in the Masters Agility. But in the speed stakes final, we want a nice open blast that anyone with the slightest skill can get around, because that's the idea of that particular event. So we've got that variety as well, even at our big events. But our local events, that is definitely something that course approvers are very aware of. They need to be designing for a local trial. It's a local trial. So
yeah, and as somebody who's done as somebody who's done like local cups and then the US Open, I 100% agree with Greg's last comment. Like when we have our local shows, because we hold trials at my facility, it's a local show, right? I mean, you have really nice courses and anybody could show up. You know, you're not walking into Columbus, Ohio and competing at the WAO. So I think as Greg said, people think, oh, UKI, and they're envisioning maybe like a AWC or WAO or EO. And there's different levels and different classes. And I think the best way to really figure out is enter a show. Go try it out, check it out. But I agree 100% with what Greg said about, you know, what your expectations are given the different event and the different classes.
Yeah, I think that's very well put, especially when you talk, Greg mentioned social media. And I think social media is something, it plays such a huge role in today's sport, right? And we don't really talk about it because no one notices it, right? We all kind of acknowledge it, but we never really talk about it. The impact that it has on course design, right? The selective pressure on judges, you know, when competitors are out there and complaining or they're praising this judge for that course or whatever. But definitely this, I'm not sure if it falls under the category of confirmation bias, right? Where you're seeing these courses. And I think even we're guilty of that. So in recent years, what I've done as part of our, you know, our online membership training program, every month I'm breaking down a map and a handler run from a big event. Well, now you've got 12 months of like complex, difficult maps, and then like these big events from, you know, AWC, EO and stuff like that. But I've thrown in there like an A1 type map, an A2, you know, jumping map from Europe. So people can see this is what the lower level competitors are doing. So I've tried to move away to give them a broader view and a different sampling. And I think as, I guess, kind of leaders in the agility community, instructors in general maybe are a little too top heavy, like a little too focused on these big events and the agility world. It's AWC or bust, you know, it's world team or bust. And they're not really putting in the work or bringing back to their classes the skills and the breadth that you need to really develop a strong community of dog handlers who can succeed and enjoy the sport with a wide variety of dogs in a wide variety of settings, right? So I think it's very interesting what you've done with UKI and all the different options that you're seeing there.
So to get if your goal is to get to that level of AWC, you've still got to develop that dog through some stages of training and competition. And if you were a 2-year-old dog, that's the average 2-year-old dog that being thrown into some of the courses that you just seen at the Polish Open, for example, you're going to blow its mind and you're going to shut that dog down and it's going to be overfaced and it's probably, that's it. So it's also, our judges need to hopefully understand that developing dogs to get to that level is also, you've got to take them through the lower levels through their training and their competing. And I think that's, our judges haven't traditionally always looked after our dogs, I don't think, in helping them develop. They've either made it a very simple course or a really hard course, and we've not had enough transition through the levels for dogs to be able to gain skills at shows, which actually I think is a massively important thing. Is what you can't reward and punish, for example, at show, but your dog is learning to do behaviours in environments which is crucial, and they do know the difference whether we like it or not. They know that competition environment and that nerves that goes down the lead from you and the different way you behave and all those kind of things.
Absolutely.
And we need to gradually, as they faced with those kind of challenges, then also the course difficulty needs to gradually increase as well. So that's what we try and encourage the judges to do. And we are looking at over the next year to try and bring in some sort of course design training for judges, because it is now probably the most important topic. People complain more about course designs than they do about missing contacts. And 10 years ago, they'd complain if a judge called them badly on a contact. They don't really anymore. It's the course design that's key. And it's a huge, as you said, it's a huge topic. It's huge course design and so complicated and so emotive on people's opinions. So it's definitely time that we were looking at trying to get some better training into our judges, and that's actually something we're currently putting together with our course approvers and discussing the topics. And actually, the biggest thing is narrowing down the number of topics to actually bring into a training situation, because there are so many topics with course design, and it's focused on maybe the main ones to start off with, and then have a higher level of judge goes on to the more diverse topics. But they're always important, always the whole way through. That's the problem with course design. So,
yeah. My concern about judging is that people are just not going to want to judge anymore, right? Like, why judge all day and work so hard and design all these courses and spend all this time and invest in your own education, and people are going to abuse you on social media.
Yeah, worldwide massive issue that we need to look after our judges. I think Lee might have been on here talking about GJP, that we was helping him do a global judging program, which we've travelled around the world doing, and it's a huge problem because judges need helping, and the problem is they make a mistake and then they get ridiculed on Facebook or Instagram, and that's it. They quit, and we don't allow our judges to also make mistakes, unfortunately, because when they do make a mistake, it does tend to be, it can be disastrous for that competitor on that day. They've got a bad call, or if it's a course design mistake, it can be, a serious issue. So, but unfortunately, people have to make mistakes to learn, and we need to try and help our judges learn faster, maybe, and think more in their preparation. I mean, I'm a big believer that most of our judging issues is because people don't do enough work at home on their course design and their thoughts, the judge's path and their design issues. So then they're faced with a problem in the middle of the day, and you're in trouble now because you're in the middle of the day. You've already set this course up, and you're in whatever you do, you can't win. So I think that's something we need. I would like us UKI to develop more as a course design judges training program.
Interesting. With the rapid growth of UKI here in North America, would you say that you are asking more of the judges that you have, or you are genuinely getting an influx of new judges over the past 2 years?
Obviously, COVID's made that quite difficult to answer. But we've certainly got a lot of people interested in designing for us, because I think they feel the freedom with UKI. So we do hear judges like designing for us, but that also, there's judges out there that, if I'm blunt, aren't great designers, and that causes a bit of conflict and issue as well with the approvers and the approval. And I think if we can start a good education of them, we would probably, people can see then who is designing good courses. That will help encourage judges probably to want to come across to us, because we can train them better. And I think I've got some good people around me personally in agility that are very, very knowledgeable on course design, and we've got some good guys now with the approvers that are very, very knowledgeable on course design and have got some great ideas. So I'm hoping that will be like what's the word? Incremental circle. It'll keep as it starts, it will develop, it will roll, the judges will get better, then the design teaching will get better, and it's something that we could just keep building on to help everybody, not just the organisation and the competitors, but also the judges as well, and judges that do multiple organisations. That's the safer course designs we get in other organisations. That's all good as well, because that's dogs not getting broken because of a stupid approach to a dog walk or whatever it is. So I think that's just good all the way through for the sport if we can improve all judges.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've said before on the podcast is that I think every competitor should read the judges' rule book for whichever organization that they are competing under, because I am not a judge, but I have started the process of becoming a judge. I don't know if I'll ever get to the end point, but just the process was hugely, hugely enlightening for me to understand some of the restrictions that were on course design, especially as you mentioned AKC. There are a lot of restrictions that the average competitor just doesn't even think about, that prevent judges from doing certain things or influence what they are able to do. And I think that it's not really fair for any competitor to criticize a judge without understanding the what restrictions the judge is working under. And so I would encourage all competitors to find the judge's rule book for your organization and read it, and you'll have a better understanding of the influences on course design that aren't even coming from the judge, right? There are rules that hugely influence what we see in course design, like course design rules, how far a judge can be away from certain obstacles, what their path has to look like, what they have to be able to see. Those are like, some of them we have to have, but they are artificial constraints on course design so that, maybe what you think is an easy, well, why didn't they just do this, may not be as easy as you think it is.
I feel like a little bit like I've completely hijacked the podcast from UKI. But let me end then with this, because I think we have covered everything that you and Jennifer wanted to cover. But Greg, what do you think? What I think UKI needs, or UK? Well, no, I guess it would be UKI, specifically North America. You need to do what the AKC has done, which is get those television contracts to broadcast their big events. So you need to get the US Open out there, lock up one of these networks. I have no idea what is involved with that, but
nor me. Maybe that is maybe a next goal to try and get the more exposure to the sport. I mean, we obviously have four-legged flicks at all our events, and they do a great job on the streaming. But
or maybe streaming is the answer. Maybe even maybe the agency is not ahead of its time here with the TV. Yeah.
We got Crufts on starts in a couple of days, Thursday, and they most of their exposure now is streaming on the main ring, streamed for the whole day, and they get a huge following. Obviously, Crufts is Crufts, so it's a different level of dog event to dog agility. It's got so much more exposure with all the other dog sports and obviously conformation, but they get a huge following on their YouTube channels. So, yeah, I guess we're changing that with Facebook Live as well and things like that. You get a lot of exposure, but anyone knows about a network, give me a shout, kind of thing, because it's a way above. That's something I've never really dealt with at all.
No, I think integrating it with social media. I thought the AKC, Westminster, and certainly Fox, they were moving in that direction, and now in the last couple of years they've just kind of gone away from the social stuff, the internet streaming, social media type stuff. I mean, it's still there, but it could be done better. And the network is just like, well, we're just running this like a TV show, and it is what it is. But I think the very successful shows, whether it's other sports, basketball, soccer, football, or just your favorite TV shows, your Netflix series, your Bridgertons, they're going to be successful because people are talking about them on social media. And so I think this integrated approach that you're talking about here at Crest, I think that's something that could be very successful for an organization like UKI without necessarily needing to have the big deal with a Fox Sports or an ESPN. Yeah, very interesting.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Greg. We hit all of the points that we wanted to hit. We got all of the scoop on the changes for 2022. And I will definitely get the links on the show notes page so that people can follow up with the rules and regulations that you have on the website.
Yeah, that's the best. Anyone's really got questions. I don't think our web page has got a lot of information on and the rule book being one of the ones with most questions that we get asked. They could very easily find by looking at the index in the rule book and finding the answer quicker that way. But yeah, hopefully our web page has got a lot of information about the cups, the classics, the opens, the two different events, and also the Facebook pages. Both the Open and the West Coast Open have got their own Facebook pages where we put information up about them. So they're worth just following, just so you get notifications that there's an announcement, because normally when we do post on those pages, it's information about the event, which is crucial information. So that's there as well for people to follow on.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. And that's it for this week's podcast. We'd like to thank our sponsor, hititboard.com. Happy training.
Thank you for listening to Bad Dog Agility. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information, updates, and links to all our socials, just check out our website, www.baddogagility.com. If you haven't already signed up for our email subscription, we would love to have you join the BDA community. Until next time, take care.